A reductive approach to a dream would say, okay, tell me your dream. Oh, well, that means this, that means this, that means this. Now we can throw the dream away because now you've got the meaning. And Jung would say, no, you have a meaning, but go back to the imagery of the dream because there's where the gold is. And we can extract and look at part of it, but go back to that. Going back to the primacy of your experience is where you really can continue to grow.
So Ken, how long have you been a Jungian analyst now?
Since 1993, so it's going to be 30 years. No, it's 31 years. It's
Yeah.
34. Yep.
So, like, I'm curious, after that amount of time, do you still read Jung?
Oh, yes.
Yeah?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah. I find that his material is adaptable to any life situation. In fact, a colleague of mine and I are putting together a workshop on democracy and autocracy. And we wanted to do it from an intrapsychic perspective, not a political one. And the ideas just keep coming. My connection to the work becomes richer and richer because not only of what Jung started, but all of the post-Jungians who have contributed since then.
Hmm.
But Jung himself, and with the publication of the Red Book and Black Books, there's been, I think, increased interest, renewal of interest in Jung and what he had to offer. And those books offer raw material of his own struggle.
Hmm. Hmm. I find too that with Jung, like his work acts, it can act as a kind of curriculum for like Western religion, Western esotericism. Like to understand Jung, you have to understand Christianity, you have to understand something of alchemy, and on and on and on. So it kind of like opens up all these rabbit holes for the curious person, right?
It does, and it also has the ability, it has the power to take whatever you thought you knew about all of those subjects and kind of turn it not upside down, but maybe 78 degrees, just enough.
Mm.
So you begin to look at it in a different way, in a new way.
Right. Perhaps in just a less literal way a lot of the time.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Can you give an example? Because you're interested. I mean, I saw that you've been ordained as a Zen Buddhist. You've studied Kabbalah. You're into tarot. All these kind of esoteric things that I'm also interested in. Can you give an example of how Jung helped you look at any one of those things in a different light?
I think the ability to look at all of those things with what I want to call a double consciousness, both respecting each of those traditions um, as they are, but then also asking myself, what is this telling me about the psyche? What is it telling me about the structure and dynamics of the human person, really? Um, it to me, it enriches any of those areas that you mentioned. Um, Christianity, alchemy, um, Eastern thought, the tarot, what is divination? What do we mean by that? It, it continues to help me see the critical role that the ego plays in constructing the world and how important it is for whatever we think the world is to be held very lightly, very loosely,
Hmm.
because we don't know. I mean, there's such richness both within ourselves and in the world. And to see those two arenas, apparently separate domains, the psychic domain and the domain of the outer world, as really co-equal and all expressing something very deep about the human person.
Hmm. When you mention double consciousness, I think I get that, and that's something that Jung helped me come to when I was having spiritual experiences through shamanism or yoga, plant medicine, these kind of things. The experience itself, like I have to take as fully real and literal because that was the experience.
Yes.
But then after, like, kind of like modern mind would kick in and start questioning, well, is it, was that really an entity that's autonomous and outside of you? And I found that Jung helped me develop something like a double consciousness or two ways of seeing and kind of holding them at the same time,
Mhm.
even not allowing one to cancel out the other.
Yes.
Like his idea of taking something as if it was real. So
Mhm.
in that, you're not necessarily buying into it completely, literally, and absolutely, but you're holding the possibility that this thing could actually be a real entity, but also, how does it change my experience if I consider it as a part of my psyche or as something that came from the unconscious? So kind of like moving between those ways of seeing and acting in the world requires a kind of ambivalence, I guess, like
Hmm.
that position of
Yeah,
not knowing.
literally seeing the both sides, value of both. Um, yeah, I think that that's very important. Jung always championed the primacy of the experience. And you can go from the experience to various ways of understanding it. But for him, you can't exhaust it. This for me is one of the big differences between working with dreams from a Jungian perspective and working with dreams from a more reductive perspective. A reductive approach to a dream would say, okay, tell me your dream. Oh, well, that means this, that means this, that means this. Now we can throw the dream away because now you've got the meaning. And Jung would say, no, you have a meaning, but go back to the imagery of the dream because there's where the gold is. And we can extract and look at part of it, but go back to that. Going back to the primacy of your experience is where you really can continue to grow. So it's a nonlinear model. I'm thinking of the word circumambulate that
Mhm.
Jung used so often, that we come to understand who we are through circumambulation of the reality, the core of our being, really, which for him he referred to as the self.
Hmm. Circumambulating meaning kind of keep going around it,
Going
looking
around,
at.
come back to it, go away, come back, but we're always, sometimes we can get farther away, sometimes we get closer, we can never touch it, but we can never leave it alone either.
Hmm. Yeah, and so that implies looking at it from all these different angles, kind of looking at it again over time as
Mm-hmm.
you change and you gain new insight or whatever.
Yes.
Um, yeah, like Hillman always said, like stick with the image,
Mm-hmm.
kind of
Absolutely.
yeah,
Right. I'm
yeah.
sorry, you are. Stick
Oh,
with the
no, that's
agenda.
okay. Yeah, like stick with the image. But I guess sometimes the question then comes up, well, um, how does that, like, if we're not holding fast to some kind of interpretation that we then can, actualize in the world or something,
Mhm.
then what do we do with it? Like, how does that uh, act of circumambulating, never coming to some kind of final interpretation of a thing, how does that then change us? It seems so kind of
Well, but how can
there's
we
no
never,
goal, right?
huh? Those are two big questions. How does it change us? We're constantly changing from that perspective because you can go back even to consider a particularly moving dream or experience you may have had under a plant medicine experience or through a shamanic experience. You can go back to whatever unfolded for you, and with the new you, reinvest in it and see what else is there. So change for me is not linear and it isn't constantly progressing. It's it's a kind of an unfolding rather than a straight linear kind of development. The ego loves lines. It loves to
Hmm.
be able to say, an analogy might be working out. Well, when I started out, I can only lift 50 pounds. Now I can lift 150 pounds. So I've made progress. That works if we're talking about muscle strength, but it doesn't work if we're talking about the life of the psyche. If we're talking about individuation, it definitely doesn't work because we continue to come together. All of the disparate parts of ourselves continue to come together. And possibly they meet at a point in infinity that one day we may reach. I don't know. That may be what Kurzweil and others mean by the singularity. I'm not sure. But I don't think I'm going to meet it anytime while I'm in this form.
Hmm.
So the idea of improvement for me is one of both a deepening and an expansion of who I think I am. And it's always challenging the ego to give up its concept, give up its notions of who I am in favor of the entire process. I like to call it, it's the Brian project or the
Hmm.
Ken project or the Susan project or that's what's happening here. There is no Brian, there is no Ken, but there is a project that begins and ends in you that is constantly unfolding. And
Hmm.
I don't know of any other psychological perspective for which that statement would make any sense at all.
Yeah. Well, what is it about the ego? I think the ego, it likes completeness, because it has such a problem with incompleteness, I guess. Like it creates some kind of anxiety to be in a place of ambivalence or uncertainty. So it loves those goals, like tangible, measurable goals, right?
Right.
And so it requires a kind of, like I think you said, the loosening of the ego, its hold on us, or at least I think of it sometimes as like retraining the ego to be more fluid and flexible,
Mhm.
rather than eradicating the ego or something like that, but just
Right.
growing it up or,
Well, here again, we see one of the great gifts that Jung brought to depth psychology, and that is for Jung, the ego is a complex, just like any other complex. And, I can have a mother complex or an inferiority complex or a father complex. I have the ego complex. And that's the
Mhm,
complex of my identity. But like any other complex, it isn't fixed. From a Freudian perspective, the ego is a structural part of the psyche. There's the ego, there's the id, there's the superego that develops, but these are structures like the radius and the ulna in my arm or my pelvic bone. For Jung, that isn't the way the ego's looked at. It's a complex. It sort of coalesces and then it relaxes. And then it coalesces and then it relaxes. The reason the ego likes certainty is it continues to reinforce the ego's illusion that it's always here all the time. But
mhm,
we go in and out. We've gone in and out of the ego complex during this conversation. When we go to sleep at night, the ego is not, just isn't there.
mhm,
But it comes back. It reconstitutes very quickly.
mhm,
And for me, that softening of who we think we are allows for a greater comfort with change and adaptation.
mhm,
But the ego doesn't like it. The ego complex does not like that at all because it likes to feel that it's the only game in town. And there's plenty of psychologies that would say it is.
mhm. Yeah. Um, so from my perspective or from my experience, uh, what helps to relax the ego, to even like complexify the ego's understanding of the self is the encounter with the numinous, with these experiences that the ego is totally out of control or diminished, or sometimes it blinks out, but still there's consciousness there. And
Mhm.
it's then becomes like a kind of touchstone to say,
Mhm.
well, no, remember that time when like I wasn't present, but something was still like witnessing through me? It's a kind of proof that like the ego's not all of me.
Right.
Do you think that's essential to this project?
I think it's essential, but I also think that your ability to say something like that is an indication of how much work you've done on yourself.
Hmm.
Because to be able to say something like that is, I think, to hold the ego very lightly. And the whole question of numinosity, think about how, especially in the West, we denigrate numinosity. Everything becomes nothing but.
Hmm.
Someone might say, sure, sure, that's just an artifact of neurochemistry. That's all that is. Don't you see that all you are is a bunch of chemicals and electrical impulses sort of vibrating? That's all you really are. So the idea of numinosity, uh, where are you coming up with that? But if you allow for the validity of your experience, well, you have to say certain things are numinous. I always say the border experiences. This is why I think every religion has rituals around birth, something about falling in love, and death. Those are the three big ones, because those are the three things that are probably the most threatening to the solidity of my identity.
Hmm.
I mean, to imagine there was a time when I was not in this form, that blows your mind. The falling in love, the complete giving over of yourself to another. What? What? What does that mean? That's a mystery. And then one day I will not be. I, I can't, none of those can be explained simply by a biochemical reduction. I understand the process of birth and I know about hormones and I understand about, what happens to the physical after death. But that doesn't completely encapsulate those experiences. Certainly not my own uh, encounter with those things.
Hmm. I think one of the big problems in our modern culture is that those rites of passage have been denigrated or done away with. So, like a coming of age rite of passage where the kind of narcissistic adolescent ego was broken down, and then the person is brought back into the community with new roles and responsibilities and all of that, right? Like more of a communal self is reintroduced because the narcissistic adolescent self would be destructive to the cohesion of the community, right? So it's kind of, it makes a lot of sense. So we've done away with those, and marriage more and more has become like, well, it's just a legal thing, or it's associated with Christianity, and I have problems with that. So we're going to find other ways. Maybe there'll be a legal agreement, but there's no sacred vow. And to me, what I realized, I didn't even know it at the time. I was getting married because, well, it seemed like the right thing to do, and my wife wanted it. But I was like, I think, we've already made our commitment. I'm a loyal person. I'm going to stick with it. I don't need this. And then I did it, and wow, did my perspective ever change? Because it was something that I could always go back to in times of trouble and go, you know what? This is bigger than me. This is bigger than the two of us. There's this third thing that I've claimed like loyalty to, right? And so that helped me get through some like rough times over the years.
Sure. Yeah. And that's reconnecting with the numinosity
Hmm.
and naming. I, I agree. There's nothing magical in, a ritual of birth, a naming ritual, let's say, or a christening or a bris or something like that. There's nothing magical about honoring the passing of someone into death. And there's nothing magical about a marriage ceremony or whatever kind of marking of union you would want. But they name publicly something that is utterly mysterious and they allow us to hold it And as you say, come back to it in times of trouble, or come back to it in times of loss. You
Mm-hmm.
know, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to get too morbid, and you're young. So, but,
Yeah. Well,
unlike, God forbid, sound like my mom, um, unless both of you perish in an airplane crash, there will be one day when one of you is here and the other is not.
mhm.
And that would add a whole new dimension to that mystical union that we call marriage, as
Yeah.
well as that being a very practical step,
Yeah.
in the collective. But it's
Mm-hmm.
more.
Hey, I want to take a moment to speak with you about this channel. Currently, only 11% of viewers are subscribed to the channel. I think those numbers are terrible. So if you're enjoying this content and you want to help out the channel, please take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe. And if you really want to help out the channel, you can become a member of the Howl in the Wilderness Patreon, which will give you access to early release of full ad-free episodes, plus access to the archive of the first 100 episodes of this podcast. It would really help me out and allow me to keep creating content like the interview that you're watching right now. Okay, thanks so much. Now, back to the interview. Mhm. I think part of the issue is that, like myself, I didn't know the importance of that sacred vow before I took it. I just kind of went with it, followed my intuition, whatever. I had no elder around me saying, you know what, you don't see it now, you don't understand it now, but it's really important for you to do, and for me to like trust that elder enough to go, okay, I'm gonna make the leap and it's gonna mean something. So the loss of elders leading to the loss of rites of passage.
Yes.
Um, I
Yes.
think it puts people in a place where the ego is everything. And so then we have people just therapizing the ego or pharmaceuticalizing the ego to deal with all of that anxiety that comes out of this lack of connection to the numinous and the kind of centrality of the small self. Um, so I guess Jungian analysis would be one route
Hmm.
to like out of that.
Right.
I don't know what to call it even that I don't know. I'm losing I don't have the word for it. But
Yeah.
that yeah, that situation or that problem. Like in it without religion, what else do we look for?
What else do we look for? And of course, Jung wrote about this at length. Modern Man in Search of a Soul. He has a short essay, I believe it's in that book, Psychotherapists or the Clergy.
Oh yeah. Hmm.
Who, in a culture where the priest, the shaman, the the witch, whatever the religious figure is, really was honored as that, mediator between this world and the other world, um, going to talk to them, receiving guidance, as you said, from them meant something. But now it's just a job. And even though it isn't for many people, it becomes that way. So then people go to therapy. But then it's been my experience over all of these years that I've practiced that therapy is becoming so flat.
Hmm.
It is so problem oriented, and the problem is always identified by some ego somewhere.
Hmm.
It's very difficult unless you go to a Jungian to just sit there and go, I don't know, everything's all right, but it feels like there should be something else here, something more,
Yeah, the something more question, right?
right?
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
most psychotherapeutic perspectives would go, get out of here. I can't code that in an insurance form.
Mm.
I can't determine that it's going to take you 10 sessions to solve that problem because it isn't really a problem.
Hmm.
But that's where people are hurting.
Yeah. And they would probably quickly say something, well, it sounds like you're depressed. So let's
Oh,
deal with the
nobody can
depression.
be sad. Nobody can be sad. It's immediately depression.
Hmm. Right.
You know, we don't even have to go to Jung. Freud's essay, Mourning and Melancholia, The distinction between the process of grief and depression, we don't make that distinction anymore. And anything that isn't happy, happy, light, light is considered pathological.
Mm-hmm.
Well, wow, that's kind of flat.
Mm. One of
That
the things that Hillman helped me out with, like I love etymology. It's like for me, it's such an education into the history and development of like our consciousness. If we look at the words and go back to the roots, it's incredible. Like you could just go to school looking at our language and unpacking it, like all these zip files, you know. So Hillman really helped me with this, but pointing out that psychopathology really is the cry of the soul. It's not something to be done away with, it's something to be listened to and followed. And so, even just like the kind of misconception of pathology, I think is one of the reasons why therapy is just too limited to meet some of these issues that people are dealing with now.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
The pathos of the soul
Mm.
is what we're looking at. But all we see is a pathology, and then we want to normatize it. If
Hmm.
something's pathological, we want to fix it. But that makes me think that I'm either always okay or broken. That's a
Hmm.
very binary system.
Hmm.
And it doesn't give me any uh, resources to handle anything on my own, which was something else that Jung was very clear about. He didn't want to foster dependency on the part of his analysis, but rather it's an initiatory process.
Hmm. Right.
And then you go on and you continue this work. This isn't just for entertainment.
Hmm.
And so often therapy is treated that way.
I don't know if I've heard anyone say that so clearly that it's an initiatory process when you go into analysis. They're initiating you into the mysteries, really, right? And I think like now, like, what do you think about the kind of democratization of a Jungian approach to, not just analysis, but now therapy and even like coaching? There's Jungian oriented coaching programs. So what I see it as is like a great democratization of his ideas and the initiatory process that you can undergo. Um, I mean, how do you feel about that as someone who's really, gone you know,
Yeah.
did the whole training and all you've been practicing
Right.
and teaching as an analyst?
So I'm always, rather than answer your question directly, I think what I would say is I'm always very suspicious when I can smell the ego,
Hmm.
because what the ego likes to believe is I can master a set of ideas or follow a set of exercises or sort of abide by a certain set of principles, and then I will have achieved all that there is to achieve. I don't think there's anything inherently good or bad about any of those processes, including analysis. Um, because, there are people that have gone through full analyses and you sit with them and you think, oh, really?
Hmm. Right.
Hmm.
So it depends on the practitioner.
Depends on the practitioner. And more importantly, it depends on each of us to not take what we might consider as an attainment, whether it's an analyst diploma or a certificate or a degree, to not take that as evidence that you've completed something. All of those things just mean you've begun something,
Hmm.
but you really can't stop the, well, you can, but then you're basically blocking the process. When you facilitate a connection with the unconscious through looking at dreams, active imagination, really coming to terms with all of the things that we do unconsciously, like projection, displacement, slips of the tongue, all of that. When you really take all of that seriously, we are always under construction. And I worry about the attainment. I worry about people. imagining that they can master all of the um, archetypes, they can know what they are. And we see various attempts to do this with lists or games or, you know, um,
Quizzes.
quizzes. I know. Oh my God, we love psychometrics in our country.
Well, there's
Um,
the ego again, right? The ego looking for
we-
some kind of clear definition of who I am. Well, I'm an INFJF
oh
or
God, oh
whatever.
gosh, oh no, you may have to stop the tape. I have nothing wrong with that, but holy cow, if we're going to use those like that, like I'm an INFP and you're an ESTJ, I think we should just be honest and go back to astrology because at least
Yeah,
that's a
it's more
system
more
that
complex.
very much more complex,
Mhm.
right? And not only do I have my natal chart, but I have all my transits and I have my progressions and I have this and that and the other thing.
And the relational charts and everything, yeah, which is
Right.
important. That you're
Right.
not just an isolated person, right? It's yeah.
But most of the time, those things are used as an excuse. I studied astrology long before I think I was in my 20s. And the teacher I had said, your astrological chart is not your fate, it's your assignment.
Hmm.
And I would think the same is true of a Myers-Briggs assessment. Okay, I test out pretty consistently as an introverted, intuitive, feeling, um, perceiving, INFP.
Hmm. Yeah, me too.
Okay, I can, yeah, that's probably why we're both doing this.
No,
But
right.
um, that doesn't, I can't, if I'm like constantly late to a party or to a gathering with friends, I can't go, INFP, you know me.
Well, people
No,
do.
absolutely. That means I have to develop extroversion. I
Hmm.
have to develop, God knows, my sensate function. I have to value thinking in a different way. I can value thinking academically. I started out in the field of mathematics, so I'm a good thinker.
Hmm.
But um, the way I put it is if mathematics were what I wanted it to be, I would never become a Jungian analyst. Um, but when you get your type, that really is your assignment to develop those parts of yourself that are out of balance.
Hmm. Right. Yeah, like the Jungian perspective would be, well, those are just what you're dominant in now, right now, like when you took the
Mhm.
test. So it's showing you really, like if you take the kind of the what would you say, like the negative view of it, it's showing you where you're less developed and
Yes,
yeah, so that's your area of doing work if you want to be a more whole, full person.
right. And I always ask which complex took the test,
Yeah, right.
right?
How'd you
That
feel when you took the test? Were you
right.
inflated? Were you depressed?
Exactly.
Like,
I can do this. Right.
yeah. Did you need to boost yourself up so you like, made a more attractive
Right.
test of yourself?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. It would look better if I say this.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of cooler if I'm a intuitive introvert or something.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I always found that very strange. Like even just because I think like kind of generally I am an introverted, introspective person. Like I love reading, I love thinking about philosophical ideas. I love my yoga practice and things. All
Mhm.
very kind of introverted in a way. But I really love performing music on stage. I love holding circles and things like that. So in those instances, I'm very extroverted. Like it's like something else takes over, and I have no problem kind of playing that role. And so I'm like, well, I don't know. I guess sometimes I'm introverted, sometimes I'm extroverted, and I think,
There's a dance. There's a flow.
yeah. Yeah,
Right.
and I don't know, that's how I want to be. I want to be a like multifaceted person. So if I find myself being too introvert just because, well, the world's kind of terrible right now, or
Uh-huh.
like
Yeah.
I don't really want to go out there and deal with it all, then I'll like find I want to push myself, you know. It's like, well, be careful there. You
Mhm.
too easily drawn into being a hermit or something, you know.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And there for me it's all about the flow. It's all about um understanding that our psychic energy goes in many directions and we just have to look at it and watch it and see what's happening. And if you are drawn to a more um, enclosed kind of introverted time, that's great. Just don't let it define you,
Mm,
just for now.
hmm. Yeah.
And it'll, you know, it'll expand.
Yeah, I just want to comment. I mean, you've got four lava lamps behind you. So every time you mention something about like, change, flow, you've got these lava lamps behind you just doing that, kind of demonstrating that.
Right. Right. Yeah, there's a story behind, quite a bit of story behind that. Not just the fact that I was in college in the 60s and 70s, but um, I have them arranged alchemically according to the axiom of Maria. The one becomes two, two becomes three, and out of the three comes the one as the fourth, and the one is
Uh,
gold. Um, and my first analyst had a lava lamp in his office, and he said, I love the lava lamp. It's a lot like analysis. I said, what are you talking about? He said, no heat, no movement.
I like that.
And he could be, and most analysts can be confrontational when the need is there. Sometimes therapy is characterized just as a big love fest. You
Yeah,
know,
all like affirmation.
everything is great and
Hmm.
what a great person you are.
Your feelings are totally valid.
Everything you think is just exactly on target.
Yeah,
And I don't know that that does anything.
no.
If we can't acknowledge the shadow, then we can't really acknowledge the light.
Yeah, well, if we can't acknowledge the shadow, then there's no hope of greater integration or individuation or wholeness, however you look at it, right? Like if
Right.
we just ignore all that stuff over there because it's going to make us uncomfortable in this relationship, and I might lose you as a client or whatever, or I can't deal with an angry person. Um, well, there's all that material that's just like there, kind
Right.
of growing in power in the
And
closet.
and if we don't deal with it, we see what's happening. I'm going to project it. And
Hmm.
then we have to deal with them.
Yeah.
And that gets really that's a no-win situation.
Hmm.
Because once I get rid of them, what am I going to do with it? Well, there's always going to be a them.
Then they have to be replaced with another them.
Right.
And
Right.
on and on and on. And we
Yeah.
wonder, why can't we like do away with the conflict in the world? Well, because we haven't
Hmm.
dealt with the conflict within.
Right. You mentioned Hillman. Uh, he wrote a very, I don't even know the adjective I want to use, a book called A Terrible Love of War.
Hmm.
You look at that and you think, we've got to deal with that quality in us that wants to destroy. Otherwise, it will destroy us.
Hmm.
And we're not just these little beings of light.
Oh, definitely not. Yeah. Even if you are a Democrat
That's right. Even if you are a Democrat,
and a
right.
liberal
Looking at,
and for social justice and all of that. Yeah.
looking at our own shadow is essential.
I mean, God, I couldn't help but think about that with everything that's been in the news in the past couple weeks, especially. Everything just seems really ramped up and amplified. And so I'm going to be speaking with you, and I'm like, gosh, I don't know if I want to ask him about what's going on in the culture right now,
Mm.
particularly in North America, particularly in America. But I don't know, are you open to that, like kind of giving your psychological take on it? Because I'm
Yeah.
sure like
Can.
me, like I can't help but see things archetypally now. It's like my
Mhm.
archetypal eye is open and I'm always like kind of seeing the archetypes at play.
Yeah.
Um, so I mean, would you be open to just kind of talking a bit about what's going on? Like particularly these two figures of Biden and Trump, I find really fascinating as like a kind of an embodiment of a Senex puer dynamic. I don't know if you see that, but with
In
Biden
each,
not wanting, yeah, but like
yes.
Biden not wanting to give up power to me is like kind of a negative. Senex is like wanting to hold on, so kind of rigid about it. And then on the other hand, you've got like a 76-year-old puer in Trump who just like doesn't want any limits at all, you know? I
Right.
mean, what do you think?
Ooh. Well, I like uh, sort of framing it as puer senex. Uh, the problem with that, of course, is it then crystallizes as Biden is the senex who
Mhm.
won't give
Right.
up. Trump is the puer that won't accept limits. And if you really like take that perspective, if nothing else had happened, the only choice would be to elect them both,
Yeah.
which is
Well,
like
here,
makes me
here's
dizzy to even say that sentence. But
here's where Hillman helped me out again because he always talked about the Senex and the Puer as being like kind of two parts of the same archetype, right?
absolutely holding that tension between them. Yes,
So while like Biden may demonstrate this negative Senex quality like publicly, like I'm not giving up power, I'm going to see this thing through, the job is not done. He also shows a lot of like the puer qualities of being kind of helpless, being weak. I don't know.
I think we can
I'm
see,
thinking on my feet here. So
right. I think that we can see that in both individuals. And the
yeah.
problem is for each individual for each person to be able to hold the tension there and not feel that they have to take sides. But I think your caution in even bringing this up indicates how easily polarized
Hmm.
we've become. And I don't even have to talk abstractly. I have to work to hear the other side.
Hmm.
I want to close off. I want to be right. Fears come up in me. All kinds of things come up. And I'm sure the same could be said for people who don't think the way I do, politically or socially. And unless we can each take responsibility for holding that tension, I don't know that this is going to change, even if we get younger people in office, which I certainly hope we do.
Hmm.
I'm 72, so I can say this. We have an age floor for running for president. You have to, according to the Constitution, you have to be 35 or older before you can run for president. I don't see any problem in putting a cap as well
Hmm.
and saying, if you are over 70, no.
Yeah, right. Yeah, a floor and a ceiling. Hmm.
Yes, because just on a very basic level,
Yeah.
who in their 70s, and again, I want your listeners to know that would include me, could protect. I would love to be able to see what the world will look like in 50 years, but I will not be able to, at least in this form. I don't, so that do I really have skin in the game the way someone your age does?
Hmm.
I don't think so.
Hmm.
And so why are we continue and this I think is a question collectively in our country. Why are we looking toward people who are done?
Hmm.
They should be advising, they should be counseling, they should be, you know, providing the guardrails.
Yeah, the Council of Elders, right?
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Right. That would be a wonderful um, role for
Hmm.
people with that kind of experience to play. But part of it is maybe in the individual personalities, which I don't know enough about. And I think part of it is in our culture,
Hmm.
where there's, as you said, I'm very worried about the lack of attention to youth and the initiation of youth, because I think what happens is youth begins to take that on themselves.
Hmm.
And somebody's got to do it. I think
Yeah, but they're not qualified for the job. That's the problem.
no, no, and we failed them.
Hmm.
On the back, also, you may see, I have a statue of Icarus somewhere here, this
Oh
guy.
yeah.
And because that myth to me is a myth of the failure of the father.
Hmm.
Most,
Really?
yes, I do. And I'll explain why,
Uh-huh.
because I think it's very germane. Uh, the story is they built the labyrinth and then they were trapped on the island where the labyrinth was. And Daedalus, Icarus's father, decided that what he would do is fashion wings by taking, eagle wings or whatever, and fixing them with wax and then attaching them to the arms. And he made a set for himself and a set for his son. And he said to Icarus, don't fly too close to the sun. It will burn the wax.
Hmm.
Well, what is the psychology of youth? I'm flying.
Yeah.
So of course he's just going to soar.
I want to get
The wax
high.
melts and he dies.
Hmm.
Well, the father should have given him better wings. Should
Huh.
have come
Right.
up with
That's an
another
interesting
plan.
take.
I really, yeah. And
Huh.
but it becomes this morality tale about someone who just he disobeyed, you know.
Uh-huh.
Wait a minute. He wasn't
Yeah.
given the appropriate tools.
That's really, I've never heard anyone with that take on it.
Huh.
'Cause yeah, it's usually, it's like a tale, it's whatever, like a cautionary tale about hubris, youthful hubris, right? Like, I'm not going to listen to you, Dad. I'm going straight to the sun. Um, the the way I remember it is that Daedalus said, like, don't fly too close to the sun because it'll melt the wax on the wings, and also don't get too close to the ocean because when water gets on, you also won't be able to fly. So I saw it like he was instructing him on like a middle path,
Hmm.
moderation. Uh, and of course, yeah, Icarus is like, no way, I'm going for the sun.
Right, right.
Just disregarded that.
But we're also faced with the fact that the father couldn't think of another way out
Hmm. Hmm.
except something that would endanger his son. And where's the understanding of the youth in that?
Right. Yeah. To know that he wouldn't listen to you and he'd go for the sun anyway, because, well, he's, yeah, an adolescent. Yeah. Hmm.
And there's a
Really
lot. I
interesting.
mean, I would not want, probably a mythologist would go nuts the way I'm
No,
interpreting.
but it's,
But
again,
at least
circumambulate the myth.
look,
Don't just take
right.
it, the way it's always taken, but like try to understand different perspectives. There's something in that too, I think. Like Daedalus was like the world's greatest craftsman, right? So I'm like, maybe at the time he couldn't have built better wings, but he probably could have found another way if he'd been a little more creative and not so reliant on his own like mastery of craft,
Right.
which might have been his own hubris to say like, I can like actually build the way out of this mess
Hmm. Right. Right. And then the death of the youth, which of course is the death of a culture.
of life. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
Which, and unfortunately, when I was younger, well, there's always war, but when I was in my teens and 20s, there was the draft, which thankfully we don't have anymore. And um, that substituted for initiatory rituals in a lot of
Hmm.
people's lives. And especially since Vietnam and after, those of us in my field are realizing the horrors that stay with people because of their experiences in war. And you activate the warrior archetype, and then for those that live, you just set them free. And then you wonder why they seek other ways to satisfy the warrior archetype, because nobody thought about that. We're playing with fire
Hmm.
when we put young people in the role of the warrior, because the archetypal ground is very powerful.
Hmm.
And there was an excellent book written many years ago, maybe 40 years now, Achilles in Vietnam,
Hmm.
looking at, Achilles is sort of the archetypal image of the warrior. And how do we help people shift that ground? So we get people coming back and they're violent or they're withdrawn or they seek to erase themselves
Hmm.
through substances or whatever. And then
Hmm.
we blame them.
Yeah.
But
Just
it's
continue to punish
what
them.
was
Yeah.
done. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So we don't have a draft now, and I hope we never do. Um, but then we've left young people with nothing.
Yeah. Well, even without the draft, we still need better ways of the return home and a ritual to deactivate the warrior, thank it for its service. But when you come back, you've got to be, have other qualities. And yeah,
And we'll help you shift the
yeah,
archetypal ground. But that would also mean shifting the archetypal ground in our society,
yeah, making more room for the
right?
lover archetype or, yeah.
And here's where I see a lot of, uh, I as a Jungian, I always look at everything from the archetypal perspective first. And, we're seeing a lot of a questioning of binariness and
Hmm.
even a questioning of things that certainly to someone in my generation was just a given gender. And, if you don't take a stand, if you don't go, oh, I think this is horrible, what's that? Or I think it's wonderful. Everybody should be what they want. Set that aside. Those are sociological decisions. What's happening? What is psyche doing?
Hmm.
What is the play of psyche here? And I think the play of psyche is let's get multipolar.
Hmm.
Let's, holding the tension between opposites got us this far. Now we have to sort of see the power in a multipolar system that can be very stable if it's honored as it is.
Hmm.
And this could be the beginning of something extremely positive. You can
Yeah.
almost feel the pull. Let's go back. Let's go forward. No,
Oh,
I
yeah.
think let's be right here
Hmm.
because this is where we could do the work we need to do so that there is a forward, there is a future.
Yeah. When the whole non-binary gender fluidity thing started to really bubble up in our culture, initially I was so excited. I was like, "Oh, finally, we're breaking the kind of ossification around this binary system, and we're allowing for more multiplicity, more diversity in the expression of the individual and all of that." But very quickly, it became an ideological thing, and like you said, then polarized. And I was like, "Oh no!" It was like the potential there was like blocked
Mhm.
by this need to get back into just a different a different polarity in a way.
Clarity, yeah.
Um,
And
and I think like one of the things that's frustrated me about it is that there hasn't been a lot of dialogue with Jungians or depth psychologists, people who value like what Hillman called the polytheistic nature of the soul, and allowing for that diversity. Like you said, the inner democracy, like there's an inner community of
mhm,
parts, of
mhm.
entities, of, yeah. And that's wonderful. And like, let's find out what your unique mix is and celebrate that. Um, and I haven't heard that discussion really at least in the mainstream.
Well, and even in Jungian circles, there seems to
Oh,
be,
they don't want to touch it.
oh yeah, or if they do, it's sort of a weird like Jung's power is asking, what does this mean?
Hmm. Yeah.
It isn't taking sides. What is the dream telling you? What does it mean to you? Can we together come to understand the dream? Well, this dream of our society, what does it mean? Not should it be, shouldn't be, should we make laws? Should we forbid it? Should we encourage it? Okay, that's not my field. My field is what does this mean that this is happening?
Hmm. Yeah. What is like the collective psyche pushing for?
Yep,
Through
right.
this thing that's coming through the zeitgeist. Like it's undeniable, it's happening.
It is happening,
And
right.
it's better to ask, like, why is it happening? And if you do that, you can, I think, really understand it. Well, because we've lived in this binary system for too long and it just will not hold. And so if we don't like midwife this new
That's a good
way
word.
of being into existence, it's going to be fucking chaotic. And like the
Yeah,
children are going to try to take it over and they're not, or the old ones who want to hold on to the way it was are going to,
right,
so there has to be that third way that,
right.
yeah.
And an acknowledgement that we live in multiple worlds. That's one of the really great gifts of being an analyst, because I have people in my practice in their 80s and people in my practice in their 20s.
Hmm.
And it's such a privilege. And I realize the 20 and 30-year-olds that I work with truly live in a different world
Hmm.
than I lived in when I was there. It is just, it's so beautiful to see.
Hmm.
And then, on the other end, the older people, we're struggling, some of us, to understand that. Well,
And to
good.
make room for that.
Make room for it. But
Yeah.
good that we're struggling, because if you don't struggle, then you judge.
Yeah.
And that's not fair.
Hmm.
It
Yeah,
isn't.
because I think like what I see with the younger people who are coming up, who are also a different generation from me, and they came up in the internet, like my
Yes,
generation helped to develop the internet, but they grew up in it, and so I have to like really work to understand their perspective on things. Um, and I think like one of the biggest things that they struggle with is that there's no one kind of like to look to for guidance and so I don't know if they like are conscious of this, but in feeling the need to guide themselves, that creates a lot of anxiety. And so I don't even know if they know what they're looking for in terms of like guiding elders, because they've been uh, well, they tend to distrust older people because they are living in a different world and they see how this world has been left to them and all of that. So like trustworthy, respected elders who can kind of meet them where they're at, but also like be a bridge to something they haven't experienced. You know what I mean?
I do. I do. And I feel that it's important to cultivate what I consider to be a Margaret Mead attitude sometimes. Just like, okay, I am interacting with someone from a completely different culture.
Hmm.
I have to ask questions and listen. Then I can give guidance. But I can't give guidance using the culture that I embody for someone who lives in a completely different culture.
Hmm.
And that openness, whether you like her or not, she seemed to bring to anthropology a kind of an openness to other cultures without judging it from a Western European um, attitude.
Right, like investigating all of your own assumptions.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, and it's very humbling because you realize things that you grew up with that were just simply unquestioned.
yeah, these truths
Right.
are not true at all.
No, no. And everything is just for now,
Right,
including a
provisional.
sense of our identity. Right, right,
Hmm.
right.
Yeah. Like all of this stuff we're talking about in terms of like, the middle way, the not, I always think like when you're talking, I was like, oh, it seems like uh, Jung, like the thing that was like the worst thing to do from Jung's perspective was to be one-sided. Like it was
Yeah.
something he was always like hammering at. Like you fall into one-sidedness, and so the worst thing you could be is like one-sided. So be like what, two-sided or many-sided. Um,
Mondalic,
yeah, right.
infinite, infinite number of axes of reflection. Because, you know, before we started, you showed me a tarot card that you drew, and it was a tarot card of the Hanged Man, I believe.
Yeah.
And if you're one-sided, the term that Jung used is an Antio Dromia,
Hmm.
that anything that holds one attitude to the exclusion of its polar opposite is destined to flip into that opposite. And so the opposite pole becomes dominant. And we see this in a variety of situations.
Hmm.
Um, we see various religious traditions who are very willing to tell people what to do with their sexuality
Hmm.
being flipped upside down with all kinds of sexual scandals.
Yeah.
Anyone who looked at that from a Jungian perspective would know that that was destined
It's
to
like,
occur.
yeah, of course, this is the
It,
way nature works.
there's no, it, the balance is going to be created somehow.
Yeah.
Or someone who's pro-life who murders a physician providing health care to women.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, wait, I don't know.
Yeah. I find myself like often like pointing out to people like the propensity toward balance in nature. It's really easy to see when you look at nature. Everyone gets it, right? They're like, "Oh yeah, of course." I go, how do you think like we're any different?
Yeah,
You think
right,
we're not like you know, whatever, like the same laws don't apply to us, or our psyches?
right.
Yeah, so be careful about being one-sided. But like, so that's a lot to ask of someone, right? Like you and I know how much work it takes to try to stay, in a dual consciousness or whatever, in that ambivalence. Um, it's like you have to keep calming the ego. It's like, don't, I know it's anxious to not pick a side. I know how good that might feel right now. But let's like just
Hmm.
let's stay with it, right? Like breathe, do whatever you got to do to not
Right.
fall into that. So it takes a lot of work. So like, how can we expect that of like the majority of people, you know?
Well, and it really takes honesty for each one of us to
Yeah.
say, when I don't do that, because the other thing that I find with anybody who calls themselves a therapist, they place an expectation on themselves that they will always have equanimity and everything will be fine. They'll never get angry.
Mm,
And I think it's important for, I always say to people that I analyze, remember, everyone in the world is unconscious most of the time, including both of the people in this room right now.
mm,
Jung was very clear about that.
mm,
And as the Red Book and the Black Books are published, we see the struggle and the craziness. A colleague of mine with whom I'm working on this course said, you know, Jung's gift was he chronicled his ordinary craziness because he didn't understand what it was. And I think each one of us needs to chronicle our own ordinary craziness
mm,
because that's where our life is. It's in the messiness. It's not in the nice persona.
mhm. It reminds me of that quote. It's so hard to tell what quotes attributed to Jung are actually from him, but thankfully I have a searchable collected works.
Yeah, me
Sometimes,
too. Right.
sometimes it takes a while to do the search because there's so much in there. But I mean, I think sometimes I think these quotes are actually like kind of pretty good paraphrases of his
Mhm.
ideas, which may not have been stated so succinctly, but kind of get the gist. But that idea that, he supposedly said, I'd rather be whole than good or perfect, which I think, is true to his attitude.
Mhm.
Uh, that wholeness, integration, individuation doesn't mean necessarily goodness or niceness.
No.
That's a hard one for people to grasp, right? Because of this indoctrination about like, coming from like the Enlightenment gurus. And
Hmm.
they're
Right.
presenting this like, you know, totally like, I don't know, geez, it looks to me like I have a hard time seeing it through other people's eyes because I just look like that's such a bland, kind of one-sided person. They're just nice and calm all of the time. Like I don't aspire to be that.
Well, you can aspire.
But it is
You're fine.
attractive for people, right? Because they go, oh, okay, that person doesn't experience the same kind of suffering that I do with all the turmoil in my life, all the messiness in my life. Like, I want that. It looks so clean. But that's not the whole picture. That's just what they're presenting to you, right?
Right. Right.
But I think that's like really kind of permeated the culture that's something to aspire to, and that it's possible if you only follow their course, you know.
Well, but notions of goodness or badness derive as much from culture as from anything else. Because
Mm,
from the perspective of the self, the delineation that the ego makes between good and bad and right and wrong simply doesn't exist. The self contains everything. But if you say that out loud in the wrong places, then you're accused of being a moral relativist.
mm,
No, I'm just saying let's acknowledge where notions of morality come from
mhm,
because they derive more from a social need than they do from some kind of core that is divided into right and wrong. It's not. It isn't even divided into matter and psyche
Hmm.
at
Yeah,
that
and if they
point.
come from a social need, then they have to be revised as the social needs change, which they inevitably do over time, and with like technology coming in and roles between the sexes changing and all of that. So we have to kind of keep updating that moral code, like sticking to the old ways. You can do all the gymnastics you like, but the Ten Commandments just doesn't hold anymore. It's too simplistic. It's from a different place and time, a different culture completely. You can't import it into our modern Western culture, I think.
Certainly not. And I think that's a good example because if we take the Ten Commandments as the ethical guidelines, we're sunk. Rather, look at the whole, where did they come from? They grew out of the needs of a people to maintain some sort of organization and order
Mhm.
so that they could continue to survive. That's what we need. But the requirements of survival in the 21st century are not the requirements of survival, 1,000 or 1,500 or 2,000 BCE
In a desert culture,
in a desert
that was.
culture that is searching for an identity. That's the other thing that's very important. If
Mm,
we look at the narrative, the Ten Commandments were supposedly in the narrative given in the middle of wandering
hmm
in the desert, a displaced group going toward what they thought would be a land that would then identify them as a group. But in that wandering, they needed something to hold them together.
hmm
Okay, that's good. That's good to know. We need to have something that defines us as a group. But is it going to be that set of laws, which, by the way, probably derived from um, uh, the Law Code of Hammurabi, as much as from any kind of revelatory source? Um, I think we can see how that just isn't going to work.
hmm
That doesn't mean that we throw them out, but it doesn't mean that we hold them as a standard that has any relevance here.
hmm But people are still looking for something to hold them together, and religion has been, a lot of people have talked about this, that religion now has been replaced by ideology or some kind of identity-based grouping or categorization, right? And that's not working either because that just creates a lot of division. You know,
Yes. Yeah.
it's like I think it was the Krishnamurti quote. As soon as I call myself a Christian or Muslim or whatever, I've done an act of violence because I've made a separation, a divide between us. So, you know, what do we do? Um, I don't think it seems to me a regressive act to go back and try to revive Christianity or all that kind of thing, right? And like Jung said, don't worry, the next religion it'll be here in like 500 years. It's
Yeah.
coming. But there will be like an answer to this problem of what happens when God is dead. Uh, do you think like for the meantime, like something like a depth like a psychological approach to life, because you don't even have to be a depth psychologist to practice these things, to do like what we me and you call soul work, right?
Mhm.
So do you
Mhm.
think it's like maybe in the meantime we just focus on like what is my kind of individual spiritual orientation? How do I engage with the numinous? How do I like kind of keep my ego in check continually and maybe find a collection of practices and philosophies that work good enough for me for now?
Mhm.
I think it's
I
something
think
like that.
that would be the horizontal,
Uh-huh.
and the vertical is communitas.
Mm-hmm.
How can that become integrated within a community, which is not the same thing as a nation, because when you move to nation, you're getting ideology. But I think individuation can't occur without relationship, without the community element, because otherwise it's just some sort of solipsistic self-perfection thing. We might as well all become anchorites and
Hmm.
brick ourselves up. But to do that search and bring it to a larger community, I'm not talking about a community of thousands, it could be a family, it could be a neighborhood, it could be whatever you consider your community to be, because one will check and balance the other.
Hmm.
And that kind of movement is also very important for growth and stability. If there isn't something like this going on, then you're stagnant, and
Hmm.
that's death.
Hmm. Yeah. So when you're talking about community, you're talking about actual community of place rather than a community of, Jungians, let's say.
Well, that's very interesting. When you said that, it made me realize how um, I was thinking about community of place, but electronic. I mean, who would have thought 30 years ago that we would have been able to just talk like this, just like we were together in a coffee shop?
The sci-fi writers. That's
Right,
it.
that's about it. But now, so I do think that the whole idea of community could include Jungians, but that's hardly a homogeneous community.
Right, yeah.
I mean, there's already three different, not factions, but approaches. But I do think it could be an electronic community. It could be there's a variety
Hmm.
of ways that community can be sustained.
But is there like, I guess what I'm getting to is like I don't necessarily have to have the same kind of views as my neighbors in order to see them as an important part of my community, that I do at times rely on them, that they rely on me,
Mhm.
all that. So it's good to have good relations, right? But also then I could be looking for like, well, I want to feel kinship with other people who are also thinking about like the meaning of life and the nature of the soul and art and beauty and lamenting over the loss of those things in our culture. Like I need that as well, right? And I probably can't get it from the guy living next door who's just focused
Probably.
on like chopping wood for the winter and stuff, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
So maybe it's a both and, right? Like be in community because they're going to push against you in important ways because
Mhm.
they don't share all of your beliefs and everything. But then make sure you also find this community of like kind of soul family, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mm,
And it's been my experience that emerges, as much as I'd like to say the ego can do that, if if you just allow your awareness to be present to what's unfolding. It's amazing how synchronistically groups can form.
mm,
People who are searching together seem to emerge in a variety of ways. And I think the internet now allows that to be global.
hmm. Yeah. But there's nothing like getting together in a room with people and having a beer or a coffee or whatever and hashing these things out in person, you know? I
I'm
miss
glad you
that
said that
sometimes.
because that makes me feel like maybe I'm not such a fossil. Um, right.
Well, some people think I'm a fossil at 50, so,
Yeah. But I do think, right, that and to maybe part of it is um being open to different levels of
Mm,
community and different levels of interaction.
hmm.
But I
Yeah.
agree with that, just
Yeah.
being together, because then you get all the whole, you said coffee shop, and it's like just the whole ambiance, the aromas, the noise of other people, all of
Yeah.
that is just part of the richness of life.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that though, be open to the different levels of like connection or community. That's great. Yeah, like I'm not going to get everything I need from like my online friends, but I'm getting something that maybe I can't get from the people who
Mhm.
are like right around me in this small town,
Right,
and
right.
vice versa and all of that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So look for more layers. Yeah, live a layered life. That's a name for a book, hey?
Yeah, it certainly is.
I was thinking like, I've listened to a lot of your lectures, and obviously, they're well written and well thought out and well presented and all that. I haven't seen if you've written a book though. Have you ever written a book?
No, I haven't. I had a couple of chapters here and there. I just haven't pinned myself down
Hmm.
to do
What's your sun sign?
Libra with
Okay.
Cap rising and Taurus moon.
Hmm. I wonder, yeah, like the cap, I would see like, maybe the cap wants to get things down, like wants to pin things down. I know my wife's a Capricorn sun and she loves making lists.
Yeah, I love making lists. The Libra sun, though, I think keeps me from making anything solid,
Hmm.
because
So thinking about that ambivalence, that
hmm
kind of thing, like yeah, always kind of never being static.
never being static. Um, I also I kind of shun the persona of the expert.
Ah, me
And
too. Maybe
I,
that's my Libra moon.
oh, maybe but I think that that does come with writing. I certainly it would be nice to have written a book. I'm looking on the bookshelf, and people I studied with, their books are on my bookshelf, but not yet.
hmm Yeah, I've thought about that because writing a book can be a way to make your mark. It's kind of like the new business card, and if you don't have a book, you don't get asked on the podcast and all that stuff,
I
right?
know. Yeah.
Like it's harder if you don't have something like to point to and go, that's mine. But like I'm also trying to like see what I'm doing here with this podcast over the past 6 years, having these like I think really good in-depth conversations with people who have been, studying different things and all that, as building a kind of library of soul studies. That's the way
Mhm.
I've been thinking about it lately, and it's no less valid because it's not all written down and printed on paper.
Right. No, not at all. Yeah. And maybe it's more, maybe we're in a period now when there's more of a dynamism
hmm
to this work. This is with all respect for people who've written books. There are some books that will stand the test of time, but most books are just merch,
Yeah.
you
hmm
know? And really?
That's great. I'm glad you said that. Often, like when I pick up a book, the publisher will send me books. Here's a new author, and they're writing about some kind of spiritual or psychological thing. Within the introduction, I got the gist, and then the rest of the 200 pages is just so you can make it into a book.
Right.
And I'd rather just have the pamphlet. Like, give me the core idea and let me kind of like work with that. Um, you know,
Right.
it's such a
Yeah, I
business.
agree.
hmm
It is a business, and that's just part of what we do here. But when I look at, the books that have really that I go back to again and again, they're not that. They're not like I can get the gist in the first few pages.
Yeah.
The ideas are developed, and it isn't just repetitious. And that's very hard to do,
hmm
to really embody ideas and make them live in printed form.
hmm Or to be like working through something within the book itself, like not like I think about Jung's work, and it's like you read that, you hear a guy wrestling with all these ideas,
Very definitely. Yeah.
right? And he wasn't like when you read his like books and the collected works, it's not like books now where there's like an introduction, there's the meat and potatoes, there's like sidebars and all this kind of stuff.
Okay.
It's
Right.
just like I feel like it's him just working out these ideas and not really thinking about the reader and kind of hand holding them through it, right? Which is
Yeah.
what makes them kind of difficult, but also very rich because you can stop after a paragraph and go, okay, I gotta go like I don't know, read the Gnostic Gospels or something before I
Mhm.
can really grasp what he's getting at here in this one sentence that he doesn't really explain.
Well, in a way, the collected works are an early form of hypertext because you
Ah, great
you
way to think
can't,
about it.
right? I mean, you
hmm
read the alchemy volumes, and I don't know anyone that could just sit there and read them. You have to go, okay, wait, let me go get this other book and see what that's talking about. And that to me is part of how Jung serves as a guide. And then you look at all of the things, the collected works are very curated. They're edited, but then you read some of his seminar notes, like the dream seminars or the vision seminars or the Nietzsche seminars. And you see the kind of unexpurgated Jung
Hmm.
struggling with questions and formulating answers on the spot and then changing his mind. And then, the red book and the black books, which are just raw.
Hmm. Yeah, I love the seminar notes. Just like I love listening to Hillman more than I love reading him. Like some of his stuff, I think like, I read it and it's great. It captures his voice. It's well edited, all of that. But when I listen to him lecture, I hear him interacting with people, thinking on his feet.
Liz
He's
vitality.
so much
Yeah.
funnier in his lectures than he is on the printed page, you know. Although there is some subtle humor in the wordplay and things like that, but comes across more readily in the recorded lectures.
Hmm.
But I love this thinking about Jung's collected works as like a hypertext. I mean, yeah. It, Imagine if somebody did like a more interactive version of that, where you could like click on something, it would open up like a whole alchemical text, and 10 days later you go back to the original text, after you've gone down this rabbit hole. Amazing.
That would be wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's been really great talking to you, Ken. I didn't get to any of the questions I had, and that's great because we
Yeah.
just kind of followed let's say in Jungian language, we followed the self. The self showed up and guided our conversation, and we just tried to keep up. So I really appreciate that. Yeah, I love people who just will be open to having a conversation and seeing where it takes us without an agenda or without giving me a monologue. This is a real conversation, and I greatly appreciate that.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate being asked to join you.
Yeah, and so I'm going to include links because you got some lectures on the Chicago Jung Institute. Anything else that you'd like me to include or you want to point people toward? I
I
think
have
you're
classes on Jung Platform, which is an
right.
online platform. Um,
I
have
got an
some,
email from Tom Moore that he's going to be involved in a kind of summit coming up on the
yeah, I
Jung
am too.
platform, and I saw
Yeah,
your name on there too,
right. Yeah,
talking about guidance, which is a
yeah,
great topic.
right.
Yeah. Where do we look to for guidance?
Yeah, yeah.
Great. Okay, and then I'll include a link to the Soulwork Center in
Oh,
Chicago, and people can go down the rabbit hole of Ken James.
yeah.
All right, well, take care.
Very
See you
nice.
down the road.
Thank you. Bye now.
Yeah, bye bye.